I'm excited for this. I'm excited
Yeah,
for this
sure.
webinar, Raina, which is one that I think we are well versed in a lot of ways due to a lot of trial and error on this subject. So how to ask for feedback. And so I first want to introduce you to the audience, Raina Fryer. So incredible Raina, Senior Director of People and Learning.
You got it right.
Is that right?
It's so good. Yes, yes.
See, I took your feedback on how I always mess up your title. And
The thing is, you didn't ask for it. I just gave you feedback.
I think so too. I think so too, which is very helpful, but excited to talk through this. You obviously have years of experience on coaching, teaching, especially on how other people should be coached as well, which is extremely beneficial.
I always say 20 some odd, maybe even years at this point in time, just really working with people, a lot of coaching, a lot of learning and development, and really working with people on how to just take feedback and run with it. I think we spend a lot of time at Titus working on growth, development. How can you be the person that you want to be tomorrow? So I'm really excited to talk about this topic today because it seems like something so obvious. And I've had friends recently say, I'm so surprised you guys are talking about things that have been out there for 20 some years. And I keep thinking it's because this is inherently a difficult thing to do. It's hard for people to ask for feedback. So I'm glad we're talking about this today.
Very hard for people to give feedback. I was just at my girls' gymnastics meet and they didn't get a perfect score. And the first thing they came up and said to me was, what did I do wrong, Dad? And I'm like, oh my gosh, like it starts so early that it's that natural self-defense.
Yeah.
Perfect mechanism in people. So this is a great topic. It obviously starts young, but I'm excited to get into it. Quick introduction for myself. My name is Mike Kinsey. I'm our VP of Talent Optimization here at Titus. Don't let the overly complicated title fool you. We do a lot of really cool things. So the biggest thing, to put it simply, is I lead a team of consultants that focus on helping companies get the most out of their people. And so we leverage a lot of tools. One of those is the predictive index. And so I use a lot of that language in here because it helps us more intimately understand how people prefer to communicate, but also how they prefer to receive feedback as well. And so I'm excited to talk about this. The big thing is we don't want it just to be Raina and I doing all the communications. If you want to introduce yourself in the chat, we know we've got a lot of people on here. Please open up the chat function, put your name in there, where you're from. We'd love to hear from you and see the chat start to blow up a little bit. If you want to connect with people after the webinar that you see on here, feel free to do that too. But there's also a Q&A at the end of the presentation, pending Raina and I don't get long-winded, which we can. So if we can't get you your questions in real time, we'll follow up with you after that. But we've got some additional time at the end. But we can dive into it without further ado. Let's get into how to ask for feedback. So a lot has been written about how to give feedback, but not as much on how to receive it, because that's a very difficult thing for us to ask for. To ask for, hey, make me not feel amazing, right? That's not usually the thing that's natural to us, is it, Raina?
It is not natural for most people to want to know the things that are wrong. And I think you started this off with almost having a counseling session with me, because I realized I've received a lot of feedback in my life because my father used to be the one after a basketball game who would immediately tell me all the things I could have done better, even though I think I was scoring like 20 some points a game. So it's very interesting. So I appreciate the start with that.
Oh my gosh. That's okay. That's why you are the way that you are, Raina. That's exactly it.
I always blame my parents for me being the way that I am. Isn't that what we all do?
As you should, as you should. It is always that. But the thing is when we look at these statistics, it's actually a bit alarming in some ways, because 85% of employees feel like they are unable to speak up at work. And 42% say that they've withheld information at work. I am definitely among that 42%. I can say that I have withheld feedback, especially early on in my career, to direct reports, or given it to them in some convoluted compliment casserole that doesn't get the point across.
Oh, like the burger, right? The compliment, the negative feedback, the compliment, the burger.
That was a classic of mine, and I still to this day work on that. It's more of a slider at this point instead of a full burger, but
fair enough.
We're getting better at that. But the reality is feedback is a gift. And that's a big piece that I I don't think sinks in for a lot of people. I don't know, Raina, when did that really hit for you, that feedback is truly a gift?
I mean, I think I've always felt, I don't know, there's a lot of achievers in the world, right? I feel like I've always wanted to achieve. And so I think I've accepted feedback very young because I always wanted to get better and be better. I was a bit of that perfectionist tendency. But I think more importantly, about 15 to 17 years ago in my career, somebody shared the acronym of GIFT, meaning that gift is given with feedback as a gift. So meaning G, given with permission, the I is the intent for growth, the F for the person, not about the person, and then the T being targeted for success. And I think hearing that laid out that way made it easier to accept feedback when I was very new in my career, and understanding that it was not to hurt me, but it was really to help me achieve and reach for the things that I really wanted to be when I grew up.
That's big, because I don't think a lot of people see that feedback is a gift as much as it is a necessity, and something that they just know that they need to take. And I know that there's been many times in asking for feedback where I will physically brace myself for that bad news, right? Of what I anticipate there's going to be improvement coming, of that person saying that I am indeed not perfect. And that's not always easy to hear, but it is the reality. So
Yeah.
the idea is to learn and to improve.
Yeah. I mean, the conversation today is really all about giving people some tools regarding how to ask for the feedback, because people are often uncomfortable giving it. It makes them more comfortable if we're asking for it. It might seem obvious as well that we should ask for the feedback, but it's inherently just really uncomfortable for people. So oftentimes why people don't want to ask, because they feel like it can make them seem incompetent. So rather than asking for help, we kind of like hold on to those doubts and those insecurities because we just don't want somebody to think that we don't know what we're doing. Sometimes we don't ask because what people share is really surface level or it's really polite. So in which case you ask somebody and they don't give you anything anyway. So you're like, why ask the question? And I think other times people don't ask because we simply lack the self-awareness that we could be doing something better. So I think all of those things are really intertwined. But I mean, here's the thing. I mean, asking for feedback really helps us to understand how people see us. And since we all get hired, fired, promoted based on what others think of us, we probably should find a way to get really comfortable asking so that we can get a sense of how people perceive us. So it's important to know what people are thinking about us, about a meeting, about an interaction, about a presentation. I mean, in fact, when we're done with our presentation today, we stay on and we debrief and we say, what did we do well? What could we do differently? We're asking for the feedback so that we can just be better.
Right. Well, this is the key. So if we keep moving to asking for feedback itself, how do we do this? And it really starts with a person being asked for feedback has to feel a certain way, right? They have to actually feel like their feedback is wanted and needed, right? Their feedback is going to lead to action. And I believe, as more of a feeler, that their feedback won't threaten their relationship. And this is, I think, easier said than done. And so, Rena, when you give feedback to a team member, what is it that you're hoping for?
When I give feedback to a team member, I hope they are taking it and then doing something with it or going to tell me what they're going to do with it. So instead of just expecting them to know that's what I want, after they ask for feedback and I give it, I'll ask them specifically, what are you going to do with this when you leave here? How are you going to apply the feedback? What are you going to do for the next time you come into this situation now that you've been given this feedback? I want to make sure that the situation where somebody's asking turns into like a learning opportunity. That's really what it's all about in that moment. It's not to make a person feel bad. It's really to help them learn so they can be an improvement of themselves in the future.
Right. I think something for me especially is knowing that it's hard to always show that you care as a leader. And it's hard to develop that trust because trust is built over time. And I really believe that. I look at some of my closest friendships, they're actually built through adversity and difficult conversations and overcoming some of those hard times versus the more surface level friendships that we have that come and go. And you talk about sports and whatever your interests are, but it's not as deep. And a relationship at work is very similar. Trust is built on feedback and adversity and overcoming consistently over time.
Mhm.
And really, it shows that you care that much more when you're able to give somebody the truth and give them feedback, because you want to see them better and you want to see them improve.
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
So now that
You
we
talk about relationships, you talk about building trust, right? I mean, a pretty good rule of thumb when you don't have an established relationship with an individual is to not give constructive feedback unless it's asked for. Or to help build a relationship, you can give it if you ask if they'd like to hear it and they respond with a resounding yes. So feedback is one way to actually build a relationship. You just have to be careful when you don't have the relationship before giving the feedback.
right. Well, here's the thing. Now we know how the person that's being asked might feel as we go into the conversation, Raina, but let's talk about some of the strategies for getting that feedback that actually does matter to us.
You know, it's fun that we have 3 strategies on this presentation today, but there's probably 20 strategies, but we're going to simplify because we don't want to give away the whole book, because there's lots of additional learning that you can do outside of this webinar today, outside of this discussion. But I think the first strategy first is think about what you intend to gain by asking for feedback so that you know what words to use to get what you need. Think about how to warm someone up for the conversation, since we have already discussed that people can be really wary of providing feedback because they're afraid of how it might be received or how it might damage a relationship if they say something that maybe you weren't prepared to hear. So we definitely want to experiment with words, be thinking about how to ask the question to get what we need.
And now, not a ton of audience interaction yet. I see a couple people coming in, but let's try to get at least a few people to respond to this. So think about this, audience. Please put it into the chat. Question: Would you create a more courageous space for you, the employee, by asking the question of your manager, do you have feedback for me? Or can I get advice on something? What do you think is a safer space? Can I have feedback? Do you have feedback for me? Or can I get your advice on something? As these are coming in, some of us are just fine with the word feedback, by the way. Now, advice feels, I agree. Some people are saying it feels a little bit more casual or safer to ask. For me, when I am asked for advice, I immediately feel like I'm special.
We get the little ego, right? We feed the ego a little when somebody asks us that. Yeah.
I must be a content expert, or I must be an authority of this if you're actually looking for my advice. And it does elicit, I believe, a little bit stronger conversation. And again, using the word feedback is fine. I think some might feel intimidated when we ask them for feedback, because feedback really makes me think about, okay, I better have something really constructive and valuable and something positive. There's got to be a lot of work into it. And that can be a little bit of a misnomer that's on me and on my heart, but that's just the way that my mind works.
You know, Mike, it was interesting at our last progress that we did with all of our people. One of the concepts I talked about was courageous candor. And at the end of that conversation, we talked a lot about feedback. I said, let's change our mindset to think about feedback as guidance. And I immediately saw people put their pen down and start writing that in their notebook, because they're like, that is the way to really think about it. Feedback is guiding somebody towards success in the future. So it's like, if you just change that word out, it just changes our thinking a little bit about what we're trying to get.
I think so too. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, it is the nuanced language that we use can really make or break actually getting what we want and what we need to receive. And something that I've felt really lucky to have at Titus is leveraging things like a behavioral assessment, like the predictive index, because now I can better understand how that person prefers that I communicate with them. So Raina, just to put you on the spot for a second,
I don't like when you do this, Mike. I don't know what's going to come out of your mouth right now.
Just to put you on the spot a little bit.
A little bit. I'm accepting.
A little. You're a bit of a maverick when it comes to communication. And when I say a bit, I mean definitely majorly so. And so we look at this as somebody who is actually a bit more, you're not intimidated by having the difficult conversations, and you can live in the uncomfortableness of some of those conversations. And so I've always appreciated that of you, of saying, you always are looking to improve and give feedback. And actually, because of that, it makes me feel a lot more comfortable to be forthright with you.
Mhm.
The other side of that is there's individuals that I've interacted with that I can look and say, wow, this person is a lot more shy. They're a lot more resistant to it. They're going to be more sensitive to um, my constructive criticism of them. And so I know that I need to adjust my behavior and make sure that I'm positioning that in the right way. I'm not sure, Raina, if you've recognized that just with leveraging some of the data that we have.
Yeah.
How do you sculpt your conversation based on that?
I always take that into consideration. I think we are very lucky to be users of Predictive Index because everybody in the organization has a profile. It's easy to access. We actually give access to all of our employees as well. So if they need to have a difficult conversation, or if people are maybe not communicating properly, they can go and look at a relationship guide that can really help them with the conversation. But it shapes the way I always communicate with people. I mean, I remember, Mike, if you want to share a little story about you being a persuader, what that was like for you early in your career in terms of giving feedback, a little bit more in depth about your profile, and then how you've adjusted over time reflects that a little bit.
Yes, I am sometimes ashamed to say that I was very afraid to get constructive feedback. And I was also really afraid to go to my manager and proactively ask for it, because I do want to be liked. That's still a very innate need. Now, I think everybody has that innate need to want to belong, or they want to be loved and needed, right? But it's a stronger need for certain people. And so with that, it made me more hesitant to gain critical feedback that I needed. And it really stunted my growth for a while. And because of that, I was really happy to be able to kind of self-reflect on this over the years and recognize that we all need to stretch in certain areas. And this was the area that I needed to stretch as a leader.
Perfect. I mean, obviously, being the coach of all of the senior leaders in the organization here, I do get the pleasure of coaching Mike, and Mike is not afraid to ask for guidance or feedback. He definitely has grown in that space. So you're flexing that persuader. I like to see it, Mike.
It's a muscle. It's a muscle, right, Raina? So
it is. Well, shall we lead with the second strategy?
Let's go.
Let's do it. So the second strategy that we really want to focus on today is to frame your questions to be truly growth oriented. We have to be honest with ourselves and just know that something can always be better. And I love the HBR article on how to ask for feedback that will actually help, where they state the strategy of focusing on the future when asking for feedback. So asking what could be done better going forward rather than opposed to what happened in the past can really help people to feel way more comfortable opening up. So not about exactly in the moment, but hey, what could we do for the next time? And if you're asking the growth-oriented questions, you probably want to identify the best people to ask for feedback. So Mike, who do you go to when you want feedback on how you can improve, and why do you choose to go to those individuals?
There's a couple of resources, and I think that circle or those resources shrink as you get higher and higher within an organization, because you have less people to go to. Things become more confidential or bigger picture. And so I think it is essential to consider the source for where you seek advice, right? It needs to be from someone you trust, and it has to be from a relevant perspective. And so for me, I really leverage, it's a leadership group called Vistage, and it's been career changing for me, because I feel like it allows me to get perspectives from such a variety of people outside of the business, and they can focus just on the needs that we have and give me direct feedback from a lens that's different. But I also really trust our executive team in being able to give advice, because they do more intimately know me and some of my tendencies. And that can be great, and it can also be challenging in certain different ways. And so I think this is one of those areas too where we would love it. I'm seeing Jamie say Vistage 5-year member.
Yes.
That's amazing. If you want to pop in there where you go to, I know there's so many different areas that we want to know that the individual standards are high enough, and that they're going to really push you. So that's where I would go to. But Raina, what about you? Where do you go?
For me, I think it's always interesting. There's a lot of HR professionals on this call today. And I think what's hard for HR professionals is you typically don't have a very big team. And when you have a team, it's typically not somebody who's sitting in your same seat. So a lot of HR professionals have to be very good at going outside of the business, going into their network. Me personally, I have a professional coach. I've had a professional coach for about 7 or 8 years now. And that person, I highly value their opinion. They were a chief human resources officer of a multi-billion-dollar organization. And that individual tells me like it is. And I really need that. I need that person who's not afraid to step on my toes or play the politics. Like, this is a person who really wants to see me succeed. I mean, of course I pay for the opinion, but I want that person's opinion. And I really trust that they're going to steer me in the right direction to help me be successful.
That's huge. I mean, I've always valued this, but more than ever, I appreciate truth. Just give me the truth, give it to me straight. I'm looking for that. I really value humility, integrity, and truth. Like, get those out and you're going to be great. You know, I think when we talk about growth-oriented questions, I almost always err on the side of there's got to be something that needed to be improved. Give me what that is, and let's just make sure that we attack that so we can get better the next time. Raina, you have a good way of kind of asking for several things. Give me several good things, several things that can be done differently. How do you do that? What's your approach?
Yeah, I just think the easiest way to create the comfortable environment is to ask everybody, like for today, we're going to be asking the question after this, like, what are the 1 to 3 things that went really well? And what are the 1 to 3 things that could be done differently? I think it's really good to even be the person who starts the conversation with maybe the 1 to 3 things that you did well or what you could do differently, because it helps other people feel like they can say those things too. And they're more likely to want to open up with more. So you create the space asking those pointed questions, but then like ask everybody to do the same. Create the environment where that is like a natural, safe space, courageous space to do it.
No doubt. That's great. Thank you. Well, let's get into the third one here. I think the third strategy is to get specific. Okay. For the long talkers, it can be difficult to get specific. You got to rein it in. When we're asked big, broad questions, it can be really overwhelming. Sometimes you just don't even know where to begin. So, Raina, I remember before you got here, I remember kind of our review process that we had and us trying to get feedback. What can I do better to be a leader?
I'm like, that is the biggest question that you could ever ask somebody. Like, imagine that your manager asks you, how could they be a better leader? Number one, I'm not sure I would be ready to respond to that. Number two, I don't think I would want to respond to that. That's a big question that carries a lot of weight, and it's so broad. It's so broad.
I know I've asked that question in my life before, and imagine the immense pressure I just put on that person, right? So you have to be specific and say, okay, something more like, would you like more touch points in our schedule? Or how can I better communicate my expectations with you?
Yeah.
Right. This is narrowing the focus and making sure that employees are fine with this way of going about it. Right. So we want to make sure that the specificity of the questions are intact. Now, I don't know if this is always my strong suit, Raina. How do you make sure that you take some of this without being leading for somebody?
I mean, maybe some of the questions we ask are leading, and I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think if you have self-awareness, you're going to know the areas that you can improve. And so it might be a little bit leading, but the great thing is once somebody gives you feedback once and they see that you're taking action and that you're growing from it, the next time you ask a more broad question, they might be more free to answer it. Because remember, we're talking about the relationship here. So it's this feedback loop that we're giving each other in these interactions. I mean, if you talk to my team members, for example, we're doing feedback almost after every meeting that we do. We're just asking questions one another, and it almost becomes like feedback's part of the conversation because you don't have to ask for it anymore. It's just a natural thing to kind of go into like, oh, here's what we could do differently. So
healthy. It's so healthy to do. And I've seen that in your team, and there's a lot of strength in being able to do that. Something that is also in the same realm of asking specific questions is being strategic and going to specific people, right? If you need advice on your budget, I probably don't want to go to our VP of sales. I probably want to go to our CFO, right? So, and I know that may seem obvious, but I think there are people that we lean on and that we trust, but it's going outside and making sure that you are being specific with who you find and a communication style that really resonates with you. So it's got to be that person you trust, but find the right person. in that seat as well.
Definitely. I mean, I think in really finality and summarizing everything that we're talking about, we all need feedback. Every single one of us needs feedback. And even being so many years into my career, I just had my quarterly conversation and I still ask my boss for feedback. I said, what can I do differently to better support the business related to our people? And it was a really robust, deep conversation. I didn't feel like I was disappointing anyone, but I now know what my manager's expectations are of me, and I can meet those expectations when I know what they are. So I think we just have to always be open to giving and receiving feedback, because it does create like this environment where we can thrive, where we can like build the security. And I think quite simply, it allows us to really be our best selves in every moment. I mean, it's crazy, but again, when people hear that word feedback, it's like we automatically think it's going to be about something we did wrong. Kind of like the proverbial comment of we need to talk, and immediately everybody goes into the shell of, oh my gosh, what's this person going to say to me? But here's what feedback is. Feedback is about how another person experiences us. It's about how another person experiences us, and we should want to know what that experience is, because we can get to understand it by simply asking the question.
My hands got sweaty when you said we need to talk. It's actually such a trigger for me.
Did you think I was actually saying it to you, Mike? I wasn't. We don't need to talk. We're good. You and I, we're good. We're good.
Thank you for that. That's great. Well, if we go to the last one here, I'm hoping people have pulled a lot of the stuff away from it. Something that you just said, Raina, though, really stuck out is you said a quarterly conversation. And so expound upon that just a little bit in terms of why that would be a cadence that we choose to give.
I mean, I think one thing we do really well at Titus is we follow a pretty natural cadence. We have weekly one-on-ones whereby we're talking about all things project related, personal, professional growth. And then quarterly, it's a little bit more formalized. But I will tell you this, the weekly cadence of the one-on-ones and providing guidance in those one-on-ones makes your quarterlies really, really easy. It's almost like nothing should be a surprise by the time you get to that quarterly, but we're definitely doing action planning based on the scores from the review. We're taking that and we're saying, okay, here's what you can do going forward to improve a score or to grow yourself. So that's what's been really, I think, really great in the way that we run our touch points, from our one-to-ones to our monthly huddles with the entire organization, what have you. There's lots of different places we're touching base. Just makes conversations easier.
So this is one I think we can probably both answer too. There's a question that came in from Haven that says, as a manager, do you recommend asking your direct report for feedback incorporated in a quarterly review conversation? Or should that only be about that side of the fence?
I mean, I love the idea of having that be a true conversation, because when you're giving a person feedback, it's almost like it's natural to want to do that in return, to have that feedback loop. What I would recommend, though, is that you don't put the person on the spot. I would preface it by sending out some questions that you would like answers, so the person does have time to process. You might also want to explain why you want that to be part of the conversation, so that takes the fear away. Mike, I know one of the tools on Predictive Index is our manager strategy guide. And that is incredible because it actually asks people to kind of rate how your manager is providing what you need based on your profile. And then the manager can also do a self-assessment, and you can come together and actually talk through those guides, seeing where you're aligned and actually where you have misalignment. And because you're both rating you, the manager, it creates a much safer space to have the conversation.
Right. I mean, self-awareness is a huge piece of this, right? But the recognition of being able to say, this person is not necessarily going to come equipped on the fly with that feedback. Like you say, Raina, it is giving them ample time to ask those questions. And it's something as simple as being able to do that during your day-to-day conversations, giving somebody an agenda, giving people time to think.
I think we have to be careful too. Some people come from environments where they have given feedback when asked for it, and it hasn't gone well for them. So we want to create the safest space possible so that they don't have that same experience. I mean, we cannot be defensive. If we ask for feedback, we have to be willing to receive it, which is what our next webinar is going to be about.
It sure is. We'll come back to this. Let's go right to that other webinar. That was the most perfect segue that we want to make sure that we get to.
Ahead. Sometimes that happens.
Sometimes it happens, right? But
it's a natural segue.
This is going to be a good one, Raina. Receiving criticism, from defending to digging deeper. I can't wait to. I feel like I'm in a perfect position in the middle, because I feel like I'm going to get so much content from you and Tiffany on this one. It should be a really, really good webinar. And so
We
really
can't wait to hear Tiffany's voice. Tiffany has been with Titus for many years. She's one of our amazing directors here at Titus, and she's going to bring a great perspective to the conversation. So we're very excited for this one to come back. But because I skipped the slide, we do want you to know that there's more about what we talked about here today. So Mike, I'll have you talk a little bit about the open session.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more about what we do on the learning and development side here, is making sure that it's knowledge transfer, right? We want to be able to give as much as we can and educate in a way that is going to be beneficial for you and for your teams. And so if you pull up your phone, pull up the camera, just in case you're not familiar with QR codes, really easy to be able to sign up for this. Feedback is a gift. You join this webinar. Raina's doing it right now. You find the way to sign up is to put your code feedback 25. You'll get 25% off. Simple math. It should be $150 for this session. This is amazing. This is probably the crowd favorite one.
This is the top seller. Yep.
The top seller. So yeah, it's very interactive. We want you to be able to walk away feeling like you know how to both give and receive feedback, which is the point. And we really do believe that this is to help take that leadership and take those relationships to the next level. All right. Raina, I think we've got a few minutes for Q&A. Is there any questions that came through here? It looks like we've got a few. Okay, here we go. We've got one. It says, how can HR teams motivate leaders in their organizations to seek feedback from others?
Ooh, okay. Well, I think what's always interesting, being again that I've spent a lot of time in the seat of HR, that a lot of people expect us to be the ones that have to deliver all of the feedback. And I have to remind a lot of managers out there that HR's job is not to be the one giving the bad news. Our job is to help coach and support and lead you to be able to have those conversations with your people. But in terms of flipping the script and leaders asking for feedback, I think you should try to establish a program whereby all leaders are doing that. The manager strategy guide that I mentioned a little bit earlier, I highly recommend that our team members do that at least once a year with their people. It gives their people a safe space to be courageous with the feedback they have for their manager. And again, the manager is also assessing themselves. So it's like, we're just coming together to have a conversation. I also think it's a fair thing to do. Again, we're giving feedback to our people. Our people should feel like they can give feedback to us.
Right. That's really fair. We've got 3 more questions here that we can kind of rapid fire through. And I can take this one. How can I effectively provide constructive criticism while maintaining a positive work relationship? I don't think that they're necessarily connected, right? When you look at the ability to create a positive work relationship is to give constructive criticism for people. It's to really show your commitment as a leader to wanting to see the best for them and wanting to see them grow and leapfrog into the next role. And so it's not just about telling somebody that they're amazing. It's telling somebody that, hey, these are areas that you're really, really strong in, but here's skills or value alignment or certain behaviors that we need to see adjusted to make sure that you are being as successful as you can be within that role. And so that to me is where I think I had it backwards when I first started as a leader. I thought as long as I'm beloved by my teammates, that they're going to be engaged and that they're never going to leave me. When in reality, when they didn't see growth and they saw that I was almost holding them back in some ways, that's actually not the best positive work relationship that you can get, even though there's going to be some tough conversations.
And Mike, looking back, we've already talked a little bit about the relationship needing to be there. We've all made mistakes as managers. I remember being in a manager seat, my first manager seat, and I was giving feedback pretty freely, but I didn't have the relationship established. So I think that's where the problem really lied. It wasn't about that I was giving feedback. It was I didn't establish myself as the credible source, as the person who was there to help them be successful. They just saw me as somebody who was kind of picking. And that was really eye-opening. So again, you have to, feedback does build a relationship, but how you give feedback the first few times, you need to be careful. You need to ask if it's okay, if do they want to actually receive it.
And that's where I would lean into whatever you got, behavioral tools, or whether it's things that popped up in the interview, everything that you have at your disposal, leverage that information, and you're going to slowly develop those relationships.
Yeah.
And that's going to lead to trust and being able to provide more of that feedback. All right, well, we've got another one here. It says, can asking for feedback frequently create the perception of low confidence? That's interesting.
So that is an interesting question. I feel like at some point in time, if you do have a team member, I don't think it displays low confidence to answer the question directly, but I do think it's important at some point in time, if you have a team member who's always asking for feedback, is to flip the question back and ask them to do some self-assessment. The thing is, as a manager, you can't always be there to tell somebody when something could be better. We have to start to be self-aware. So again, after this meeting, I'm going to be asking people what we did well, what we need to do differently. I'm going to be answering the question for myself first. I'm always thinking about what I'm going to assess first. I'm going to do an evaluation. So if you get that person, you have to teach them to do it for themselves, to walk away from a situation where there is no audience or is no observer, so that they can grow from it on their own.
And whoever asked this question, I can relate to this as well. You definitely want to better understand the balance. And this is too where I would say, see if there's going to be numerous people that you can trust to get a variety of different feedback, so you don't feel like you're constantly maybe feeling inept or feeling not confident.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to be a really big piece for you to take that next step, because feedback is a true gift.
And Mike, you go back to also looking at people's profiles. You might have a certain behavioral style that really needs to hear things a lot. And so I think if you have a team member who's asking you constantly for feedback, maybe they need more validation. Maybe they need to feel like you are helping them grow. And like, I think that's you then need to flex as a leader to give that to them more often, so that they're not always having to put their hand up and ask for it.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've got someone on my team who says, I don't need any fluff. I don't need any praise. I just need more promotions and money. And I'm like, got it. Now I know how to motivate you, but it's not going to be through words, right? It's going to be through acts. So you're right. There's going to be things that we can do to make sure that we do things the right way as leaders.
Yeah.
I think we got one more here. It says, can you suggest any strategies for accepting negative feedback in a manner that facilitates positive improvement?
That's okay. Big question.
Big question.
I feel like in any situation where somebody is giving you feedback, one of the best responses is really just to take the feedback and reflect on it, rather than feeling like you have to say anything in the moment, especially if the feedback takes you off guard. So you might go in asking for feedback and think one thing's going to be said, and it's more like a validation of what you were already thinking. So if you have that self-awareness, but then they give you feedback maybe that wasn't expected, just embrace it, because remember that feedback is coming from a person's perception, and their perception isn't always reality. It's their perception. So I think take feedback, soak it in, reflect on it. And once you've had time to process it, you might want to go back and ask some additional questions about why the person might have felt that way, and ask for more once you've had a chance to process it.
Definitely. When I hear feedback that initially stuns me or hurts me, I like to try to take a breath and process and think, is it fair and is it true?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Is it hurtful because it's something that I have in myself that I do need to change? Yeah. Or was it hard because of the way that they communicated? Because there's two very different things that you need to do. If it's the way they communicated, I want to give them feedback on how it made me feel, how they could better communicate with me in the future to get the same result. But then ultimately, if it is fair and if it's true, I know I need to take that back, and it's something that I do need to work on and reflect on myself.
Ooh, deep
That's
questions.
it.
Deep questions.
That's a great, deep questions. I really appreciate that. We definitely appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Again, we've got receiving criticism from defending to digging deeper coming up on August 30th at 11 o'clock Central Time. Don't think you want to miss that. as well as feedback is a gift. If you're interested in joining that, we would love to have you. But thanks again for joining the webinar today. Have a good rest of the day. Thanks all.
Bye-bye.